If you live in India, the food you eat every day is often regulated more strictly for foreign consumers than it is for you. Recent investigations have detected heavy metals like arsenic and lead in samples of commercial baby foods. Nationwide surveys have flagged adulteration in milk across multiple states, ranging from dilution to the presence of detergent. The food regulators' own national quality surveys have repeatedly identified synthetic milk as a concern in specific regions. And studies have found that even everyday staples like salt can contain microplastic particles. These are not isolated incidents. This is not just a story about hygiene. And this is not just a story about corruption. This is a story about incentives. It is about a regulatory system facing severe capacity constraints and an economic structure that creates incentives for non-compliant operators to substitute cheaper, unsafe alternatives. India occupies a strange paradox. We are an agricultural titan, the world's largest producer of milk and spices. But there is a regulatory capacity gap at play. When Indian food is destined for Europe and America, it goes through rigorous scrutiny to meet strict sanitary standards. But the food that stays here in the domestic market often operates under a very different enforcement reality. Why? It starts with the inflation adulteration nexus. When the cost of production rises, transport, feed, fertilizer, but consumers refuse to pay more. Vendors face a margin squeeze. To survive, some engage in quality shrinkflation. Instead of raising prices, they substitute expensive ingredients with cheaper, unsafe alternatives to keep the price tag stable. In economics, this is known as the lemons problem, where bad products drive out good ones because consumers cannot easily distinguish quality. At this point, a natural question arises. Where are the regulators? Where is the Food Safety and Standard Authority? The answer lies in a single sobering statistics from a 2021 report. India had an estimated 10 million food vendors. The number of food safety officers responsible for inspecting them was just 2,531. That is roughly one officer for every 4,000 vendors. Routine surveillance under these conditions is mathematically impossible. Most inspections are reactive, which means they triggered only after a scandal breaks. And even when violations are detected, enforcement faces bottlenecks. Between 2018 and 2021, out of 1,906 failed samples, only 10 resulted in convictions. Why? Because for many operators, the economic penalty for non-compliance is often lower than the cost of following the rules. This lack of oversight has global consequences. Between January 2024 and April 2025, the US FDA refused approximately 2,687 Indian food shipments. The reasons range from salmonella contamination to excessive pesticide residues. In the European Union, Indian spices faced scrutiny for ethylene oxide, which is also known as ETO, a class 1 carcinogen used as a cheap sterilizer. Export markets often impose stricter standards than domestic law requires. But a critical policy gap remains. Indian domestic regulations do not mandate routine testing for ETO in spices sold within India. In the absence of a strict reject and destroy policy, experts warn that rejected consignments can be redirected into informal domestic supply chains. The result is a system where export compliance exceeds domestic enforcement, leaving the local consumers exposed. The result is rarely immediate food poisoning. It is slow toxicity. We see this in microplastics. A 2024 study found that 93% of tested salt samples contained microplastic particles. We see it in antimicrobial resistance. The poultry industry's use of antibiotics like colistin, a last resort drug for humans, is accelerating the rise of drug-resistant bacteria. and we see it most clearly in children. Investigations have shown that rice-based baby cereals can contain elevated levels of arsenic and lead because rice efficiently absorbs heavy metals from contaminated soil. These risks accumulate quietly over years. So, how do we fix the broken system? Not with raids, not with the scandals. We need structural reform. First, closing the jurisdiction gap. Food safety regulation focuses on the product, but contamination often begins at the farm. A unified farm to fork authority is essential. Number 2. Strict liability. The presence of an adulterant should be sufficient for conviction without years spent proving intent. And number 3. Traceability. Technology can do what manpower cannot. End-to-end traceability systems can allow consumers to verify testing records, forcing quality through market pressure. Food safety is not a luxury. It is the baseline of a functional economy. As long as the regulatory capacity gap exists, and as long as non-compliance remains cheaper than compliance, the Indian plate will continue to carry hidden risk. It is time to demand not just more food, but safe food. This is Akshat, signing off.